Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. On today's show, I'm going to go back and address something my cousin Amy mentioned a while back. She'd posed a series of questions about money and economics. I was watching a documentary about New York City a couple nights ago, and it reminded me of this economic system that was in place from the 15th to the 18th century that really dominated the world, changed history. It's called mercantilism. So yeah, I'm going to go back and just talk a little bit about that. I'm not a historian, nor am I an economist, but it should be a fun little conversation. But before that, I will address a question from my sister Jamie. She wants to know what famous people share my birthday. Now, my birthday isn't until August, but I'm going to answer that question now because it will be fun. Okay, guys, let's start the show. Okay, so for the Millicent clan, some famous people who were born on my birthday. I'm going to do my top three. First off, we have director John Huston, directed such great films as The Maltese Falcon, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. He did a version of Moby Dick. He turned The Red Badge of Courage into a film. We've got The African Queen, The Asphalt Jungle, Fat City, The Man Who Would Be King. Did a lot of really, really great movies. So John Huston's one. Cool director. Dig the guy. Next up, I have to go with Adam Yauch. This is a Beastie Boy. He passed away a few years back, but the Beastie Boys music was very influential for me. You know, from the early 90s with Check Your Head coming out, Ill Communication, Paul's Boutique. I really enjoy most of their albums, but there was a few-year period there in the early to mid-90s where they were very, very influential, and really was my introduction to hip-hop. So yeah, Adam Yauch, MCA, also born on August 5th, just like me. At number one here, though, I'm going to have to go with Neil Armstrong. He was pivotal in the development of the space program, great pilot. A tragic story here, of course. He lost a child as the space program was ramping up, but just did incredible things. So Neil Armstrong, another August 5th birthday. He was also born in Ohio, just like me. Just been a big fan my entire life. But there you have it. John Huston, Adam Yauch, and Neil Armstrong. Thanks for the question, Jamie. Right, so now let's get into this discussion of mercantilism a little bit. And again, Amy, I'm not an economist and I'm not a historian, but this is something that Americans really should understand or at least know about. So basically back between the 15th and the 18th centuries, all the great powers, Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, etc., used this economic system called mercantilism. It's an economic system designed to create large trade surpluses for these world powers. Basically, they use imperialism, colonialism, taxes and tariffs, heavy-handed control of their economies to achieve a system that allowed for accumulation of wealth for the monarchies. You have to understand at this time, wealth was thought of as a finite, tangible thing. Silver and gold were used for payment and commerce. So the main goal through mercantilism is for these monarchies to build up their caches of gold and silver so that they can use that money to build ships, build armies and navies, conquer new land, and establish trade ports throughout the world. But basically, mercantilism was a very extreme form of economic isolationism. So a country like Britain, for instance, would set up this closed loop of trade between their mother country, England, Britain, and their colonies. A great example of this would be the Atlantic Triangle system, where you have a Britain trading manufactured goods and textiles to Africa for slaves, who are then transported and traded in the American colonies, who are then traded for goods from the American colonies, which then goes back to Great Britain for use in manufacturing, and just continues the cycle going and going and going. It's this closed loop where an economy is built up based on resources and colonies. We see great naval fleets built up. We see constant warfare. Wars going on to conquer new territory, to protect trade routes, and to protect the interests of these great world powers. Obviously, these closed economic systems, these mercantile systems, caused a great deal of tension between these world powers. But war wasn't the only drawback here. In order to keep a high trade surplus, these countries had to make sure that their own citizens, their workers, weren't consuming more than they were producing. What they did was they held down wages for tradesmen, for craftsmen, for workers, pretty much anyone who was producing the goods that they were exporting, so that the workers, the working class, the citizens, wouldn't have enough wealth to then go out and consume on a mass scale. You really don't want to throw off this trade surplus that you have, and it's kind of inevitable that's going to happen as a country grows economically. So we can see now, looking back, that there's some great flaws in the mercantile system. We saw great thinkers of the time, John Locke, my namesake Adam Smith, the Scottish economist, write a lot about this stuff. And those two were really at the forefront for bringing about these new ideas. Adam Smith, with his economic ideas, considered the father of modern capitalism. And then John Locke, with his economic but broader philosophical ideas, that we then see pushing liberalism to the forefront. And by that I mean liberalism in the classical sense, where you have individual rights, unalienable rights, free markets, and this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Even John Locke was saying that is what wealth is. It's manufacturing, it's the production of things, and then trade of those things. Karl Marx comes along. He has his own economic theories about how to deal with this stuff. Says, well, if that's the case, then why shouldn't the workers own the means of production? And this is really the basis, the heart of what is Marxist socialism. It's not about redistribution of wealth or taxation. It's a system where the working class owns the means of production and trade. So while mercantilism does die off there in the early 19th century, we continue to this day to discuss what is the best way to generate wealth, what is the best way to get that wealth to the people who need it, and what is the best economic system. I think it's kind of foolhardy as well to think that 300 years from now, the economic system that is predominant in the world is going to look anything like the economic system we have now. But going back here, I don't want to get off track. There was one world power that had a slightly different view on this mercantile system, and that was the Dutch. So they were traders, they were a world power, of course, but they had a slightly more libertarian and slightly more laissez-faire ideas about trade. So the Dutch were really willing to trade with whoever they wanted. So with that in mind, when they came over to the New World and they sailed into the harbor in what is now New York, at the mouth of the Hudson River, they were taken aback. This was one of the most amazing harbors they'd ever sailed into. They quickly established a colony there, a city called New Amsterdam. They knew that this was a great harbor, and they knew that this city would be a center of trade for generations to come. It wasn't long before the city became a bustling trade zone. The Dutch needed workers from all around the world, so they welcomed immigrants from all over Europe and elsewhere to come in and do the work that needed to be done. By the time the British actually sailed into the harbor there and took over New Amsterdam, New York was one of the most diverse places in the world. But while Britain at that time was struggling to hold on to this system of monarchy and this economic system of mercantilism, this more free market spirit remained in what was now called New York. So as we move through the 18th century, and the British colonies in America become more powerful, the British are struggling to maintain the status quo. They're struggling to maintain their economy. They're fighting wars, so they're imposing greater taxes and tariffs on their colonies. So the American colonists were very upset about these new taxes, these new tariffs. But the bigger picture here really was they were tired of this mercantile system. It was outdated. It was dying. The colonists wanted to be able to trade with whoever they wanted to trade with. They wanted to be able to make as much money for themselves as they could. So the taxes were kind of a breaking point here. Taxation without representation was the call. But I think really it was this grander mercantile economic system that they were actually fighting against. Anyway, that's it for today's show, folks. I hope you have an enjoyable day. Stay safe, stay sane, and we will see you tomorrow.